I hope it will benefit both of us, both you as student and as teacher, myself also. Learning is my greatest pleasure and teaching is the best method of learning. With a few words, with these few words, let us start to the subject right now. Today's subject. Hello, do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Perfectly,
thank you. We'll try to brief it within 20 minutes so that you can have interactions. It's a known topic. Osteomyelitis, rather bone and joint infection. Bone and joint infection is very common. It's also important not only clinically but also in your exam. Bone and joint infection involves bone and as well as joints. In bone, it's called osteomyelitis. Osteo means bone. Myelitis means marrow inflammation. Itis, inflammation. So osteomyelitis, it may be acute, subacute, or chronic. Now, objective of this learning is so that you can define what is acute osteomyelitis. What are the natural history of osteomyelitis? How to diagnose it clinically? What are the radiological features by which you can confirm the differential diagnosis which you should consider, and complications and how to manage it? With particular reference of children, because it's the children who are sufferer most and badly also, if not treated properly. It's a pyogenic infection of bone and bone marrow. More than 50% cases occurs in preschool children. When call it acute? If less than 2 weeks, then we call it acute. If more than 6 weeks, we call it chronic. And in between 2 to 6 weeks, that is subacute. Causative organism, mostly Staph aureus and its hematogenous spread. It can also occur from exogenous sources, like in case of fracture on the right hand side, you can see the fracture, as well as some chronic infection leading to underlying soft tissue infection, or in case of mastocytitis where the bone is also involved. Secondary, exogenous. This is clinical example. Gram-positive organisms, Staph aureus, is found 70 to 90% cases, and gram-negative, H. influenzae, E. coli, Pseudomonas proteus, that occurs more in case of immunocompromised persons, and Salmonella is particularly in case of sickle cell anemia, a MCQ for PG preparation. Streptopyogens and pneumococci are also involved, but less, and it's the MRSA Staph aureus, that means methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which are upcoming new superbugs for which no antibiotic can be found many times. Predisposing factor of immunocompromised situation is there. We know we have 1 trillion of cells, but 10 trillions of microorganisms in our body. So you can imagine if the host defense mechanism was not there, then and only then infection happens. Mere presence of bacteria in the body or body surfaces are not, that does not mean infection. So it's host defense, humoral as well as cellular, that is to be weaker compared to bacterial, so that the homeostasis lasts, then only infection occurs. So nutritional aspects should be kept in mind always. That should give precedence. It has bearing also in the treatment. Which part affected? It's the ends of the long bones, which are called epiphyses, Not the end, it's near the end, it's metaphyseal. It's the metaphysis where osteomyelitis in children occurs most. may involve thereafter diaphysis also, but epiphysis is resistant. Why metaphysis? It's the hairpin-like loop where the blood flow sluggish. There is lack of collateral circulation, where the muscles and ligaments are attached. All these factors might have some role, the exact cause is not known. But it's the primary side which is involved. What happens? What's the pathology? So whenever the infection settles there, through the blood it comes, it settles here, there will be some exudation, rise in the intraosseous pressure, there will be vascular stasis, thrombosis, and that increased pressure will further obliterate or prevent inflow of the blood to the arterial system, and therefore more and more bone will be ischemic, and that also goes secondary to ischemic necrosis, and inner area will be necrosed by the toxins liberated. All these cause bone necrosis. Thereafter, body's host mechanism activates that try to resolve the dead bones, lay down newer granulation tissues. Actually, the growth plate acts as a barrier. It's a avascular, except in neonates. That's why in neonates it can cross the physis, but after 6 weeks of age, that vessels which crosses the epiphysis, that's obliterated. Thereby, epiphysis acts as a natural barrier. But still, joint may be involved because there is capsular, whereby the epiphysis is intracapsular. Then, automatically, the subperiosteal collection, which is just outside, that will burst into the, that will go into the joint, intracapsular, keep the high epiphysis. So that's the pathology. Primarily involves metaphysis. After metaphyseal collection, that under tension, that will go to the Haversian canals, the pores in the cortex or in the subperiosteal region, pus will go out, and that can go also along the medullary cavity. Bone marrow is also involved, thereby diaphysis is also secondarily involved. You can see this two pathways here. Therefore, suppuration occurs mostly in the subperiosteal region, in the junction of the epiphysis and in the metaphyseal region. There will be overlaying, swelling, pain, redness. Along with that, the muscles nearby, there will be the spasm to prevent movement, so that pain becomes less. There will be joint movement will be less, and there will be stiffness. There may be some sympathetic effusion of joint. Also, if the physis is intracapsular, then what happens? This pus will go to the joint. There will be septic arthritis. So, you can understand what happens in case of infection. So, 39 participants so far have joined. Okay, in the holiday, I am disturbing you. I am enjoying myself. Sorry to bother you. Anyway, so the other path is the medullary. It may travel along the medullary cavity. What happens next? After the bone is dead, body try to separate it out by new bone, by the granulation invades on either side, try to resorb it, phagocytosize it. So there will be on either side of the dead bone, there will be some granulation tissue that is reflected by the osteolytic zone. So a dead bone, which is, how do you know it dead? Because it has no vascularity. It's dead, so it will be dense, because surrounding hyperemia will result in a sort of osteoporosis, bone turnover will be more, but the dead bone has no turnover, therefore it is appear as osteosclerotic, or compared to, that means it will be dead, whitish, and on either side it will be lined by granulation tissue, that's a osteoporotic area. So osteosclerotic bony fragment on either side lined by the granulation, that is the sequestrum or sequestrum. There will be periosteum is elevated because of the subperiosteal pus, and the cambium layer, inner layer, cambium layer, that throws some bones. That is called periosteal reaction. And over the sequestrum, from the osteoblasts will die from all around to lay new bones. That's called involucrum. So sequestrum, periosteum reaction, and involucrum, these are all features of osteomyelitis, radiological features, but that becomes a bit late. So necrosis occurs within first 48 hours. Subperiosteal for past, if found, then we can be sure that there is inside also bone involved. So pressure is already released. But if we don't find any pus after opening it, but the patient is febrile, patient is otherwise clinically highly suspicious of chronic acute osteomyelitis, we should drill it because the abscess may be localized inside the bones. Till then, if we do that localized, so we may not find pus outside the bones in the periosteal region, subperiosteal region. So in that case, we have to make drill holes. So a baby or child is present, say after 24 to 48 hours, and with a strong suspicion, fever is not controlled with antibiotic, we should not delay making multiple drill holes so that pus comes out. That will prevent the surrounding bones to be not affected by the ischemia, or ischemic loss will be much restricted. Ischemic loss of the surrounding living bone, that is possible if we do multiple drills. If no pus is found, we are coming to that later on the treatment. So how do we diagnose it? It's by and large clinical. There are 4 parameters, particularly in children, which tells it's a 99% chance of osteomyelitis. No need of almost substitute investigation. One is history of fever with pain, swelling, tenderness, restriction of the movement. There may be fluctuant swelling in the ends of the long bones, around the knees, around the elbows, with features of toxicity. On that is sufficient to diagnose it's a case of infection. But also there is history of misleading history of trauma. So how can you differentiate? A child, when presents with history of trauma, if it's traumatic origin, then pain, swelling will be then and there. So mother will tell he had fallen last day, could walk thereafter, but next day he could not walk. That's the typical history. When you should think, no, it's not an infection, it's not a trauma, it's a cause, it's an infection. So that's the clinic, which is very important. All history will tell whether it's traumatic or infected. Besides this, laboratory tests help us. So we can have bone pain. A child cannot refuses to mobilize his affected limb with this sort of swelling. In this child, you can see a dimple, which is basically represents old heel sinus. If such a old heel sinus is present and there is a fresh swelling, say 2-3 days or 7 days, then a chronic osteomyelitis with acute exacerbation. That's telltale sign of osteomyelitis, which was there earlier, which is healed with treatment, but it has flared up. Once bones infected, you cannot guarantee, assure that there will be no infection next time. You cannot kill all the microbes because they form their own nests where even our antibiotics, whatever we prescribe, that does not reach. There may be restriction of the movement because of the sympathetic diffusion as well as muscle spasm, and at times subacute involvement, particularly if the physis is intracapsular. Now, investigation. Blood samples. Whenever a child presents with history of fever and the limbs are upper limb or lower limbs is not mobile, they try to keep it, safeguard it. You don't move the child, does not move his hands or feet, then you think that is painful. So it may be traumatic, it may be infective. So with the history will tell whether it's infective or not. But what to do now first? Should we go to the first antibiotics? No. Before that, whenever possible, we should try to have the identification of the causative organism. How can it be? If the patient is fever, is not under any drug, if we take the blood culture, that will give best result. If he has some collection, fluctuation, we will aspirate it, send it for the biopsy, so for CS routine examination as well as the culture sensitivity, and that will help us identification of the organism. However, blood culture are positive only in 50% cases. CBC, where PMS, polymorphs, that is increased more than 85%. High ESR, more than 20. CRP, more than 6. If there is fever, PMN is increased, ESR is increased, and high CRP, you label it as osteomyelitis, 99% chance. And if you aspirate it, you can identify the pathogen, and that's next diagnosis start. If you find fast, don't wait for imaging. Do the imaging if readily available, but your imaging or your investigation should not delay the treatment. If in the same day USG is possible, you do it. If you want to do MRI, do it later. But if a child presents with a fluctuant swelling near the ends of the bones, near the joints, then do the aspiration. Either in case of septic arthritis or in the periosteal stage, you will get the diagnosis instantaneous, and don't wait, because surgeon's knife relieves millions of bacterial burden and thereby helps recovery of the patient, symptomatically as well as in the long run. What are the other modalities which are useful and when to do? Plain X-ray. It's normal usually in the first 3 weeks, except that there will be soft swelling and loss of tissue plane, which is readily understood nowadays with the digital X-rays. Bone rarefaction is the earliest thing which can see, and followed by periosteal lesion, but that's a later feature. And itic lesion, sequestrum, that are cavitation, that is hallmark of chronic osteomyelitis. Here you can see that's there is a lytic osteopenia, area of osteopenia. Here you can see periosteal reaction, ligament formation, and sclerosis also. This is the plate feature where you can see it on either side lined by granulation tissue or osteolytic area, a dead bone, that's called sequestrum, and there will be involucrum formation. You can see there is marrow cavity is not obliterated because of the overlying new bone formation all around. Previously, bone scan was used. Nowadays, it has very, very limited role. It's more of the theoretical, but whereas it shows the metabolic activity is more. It may be effective, maybe it may also be occurs in the traumatic like fractures. It may occur in the bone tumors, or even after surgery, a reparative process goes on. So it has no specificity for diagnosis. However, focus of tracer activity 1 to 2 hours post-injection, if correlated with the fever, with the clinical picture, that can be of help at times of doubt. Very, very less. MRI is upcoming investigation of choice in case of unclear situation. You can differentiate between pus and blood. However, it's not specific. What will happen in the MRI? Whenever there is pus formation, so the bright fatty marrow will be replaced by low signal intensity of the inflammatory X-ray. So that's the hallmark of the infective changes. But that can also occur even after, say, repetitive trauma like stress fracture, say marathon runner, complaints of brain pain. You have done the X-ray, you have done the CT, nothing is there. You can see only marrow edema. The backdrop of marathon running, the repeated stress, is more in favor of stress fracture, not for the infection. But it with the history of child having fever, it's infection. It points towards the infective etiology. So very early feature is there in the MRI in case of unclear situation, but that is not specific, and clinical important picture is very, very important. However, it has the advantage, not only early detection, there is no radiation hazards, that has positive advantages. What's the role of USG? Ultrasound helps by localizing. Where is the field? Say in case of field, if there is osteomyelitis or in this septic arthritis, where is the collection? You even the deep structure, you even on aspiration miss where is the collection. So if you can localize where is the collection, amount of the collection, you can detect it and you can aspirate. Till then you can find it out. Otherwise, many times, many of my residents have, even after diagnosis we have made, have been taken to the OT but could not find out the collection. So if you know the amount that there is 10 by 15 cc or 3 cc by 3 cc, 3 by 4 centimeter of collection, then you can aspirate it, and under USG you can put the needle in the collection and aspirate it. So USG is the important in case of amount of collection, where it is, and type of collection many times. In case of differential diagnosis, what are the things to be considered? This is a long list, but important clinically is the septic arthritis. How to differentiate it? In septic arthritis, swelling is at the joint. In osteomyelitis, it's away from joint, near the joint. Tenderness in septic arthritis at the joint maximum. In case of osteomyelitis, it's near the ends of the bone, not exactly over the joint. Movement in both the conditions may be restricted, but it's more restricted in septic arthritis. So that difference is there is less movement in septic arthritis, much more painful on attempted movement in septic arthritis compared to osteomyelitis. Subcutaneous abscess or cellulitis, many times may not be possible. Therefore, determine. You think any swelling, tenderness, pain with history of fever in a child as acute osteomyelitis until proved otherwise. Another thing to be considered along with the is the Ewing sarcoma. It may be surprised. Ewing, it's quite malignant, but infection is malignant. Yes, it happens. In our country particularly, usually they present late, and by the time there is some bone destruction, subacute condition, there is bone destruction, periosteal reaction, some fractions, some swelling is there, with all features of calor, rubor, double tumor, and that also occurs in Ewing's, which is primarily diaphyseal, now it's a diaphyseal metaphyseal. Even pus-like material may be there. Why? Because of the fast growing or growth of the tumor cell. The normal cells deprived of nutrition undergoes necrosis. Tumor necrosis inhibiting factor causes necrosis, and therefore our application even pus-like material may be found. So Ewing sarcoma should always be have the diagnosis, and therefore whenever possible, whenever you aspirate the material, you send it and it to tissue specimen. Always send it for the CS as well as the biopsy. What are the complications? The commonest complication is septic arthritis. Next is chronic osteomyelitis, particularly if presented late, if not treated properly. And other things are pyemia, abscess anywhere in the body, septicemia. In long-standing cases, there may be pathological fracture because the bone is weaker, if not splintered properly. If mobilized before involucrum, good involucrum is formed, there can be pathological fracture. And squamous carcinoma, the ulcers which are found in long-standing cases of chronic osteomyelitis, though rare, is not infrequently found. Last week I had also such a case. They had 25 years of ulceration there. What are the treatment? The nutritional support already I have told, that should be always there, and immediately dehydration is there. Along with that, analgesics antipyretic is obvious necessity. Shrinkage of the limb also needed, not only to give the comfort, but so that infection does not spread. Besides, mainstay is the antibiotics. It is a broad spectrum antibiotics or narrow spectrum. There is a controversy. When to start? How to start? Which is best? These are the questions which are put forward. The antibiotic at earliest, but always, whenever possible, you collect the sample for CS, culture sensitivity, so that you can identify the organs, either by the blood culture or the aspirated material to be sent for CS. Next is the whether broad spectrum or narrow spectrum. Usually broad spectrum because we do not know which antibiotic the organism is sensitive and what is the causative organism. However, 90% cases of Staph aureus is there. So there are proponents of narrow spectrum antibiotics which are to which Staph aureus are susceptible, like flucloxacin. Logic behind is that broad spectrum may unnecessarily promote resistance, antibacterial resistance. Therefore, narrow spectrum antibiotics are also proposed by someone. However, before culture sensitivity, general practice is to give a third generation cephalosporins. Which route? It's obviously IV because we do not want to be unpredictable absorption either from the oral or intramuscular. So more predictable IV, that's best. How long? Till at least clinical symptoms improves, or at least 3 weeks, preferably 6 weeks. However, for logistical problem in our country, usually till the clinical symptoms subside, we provide injections and thereafter switch over to oral, which are also almost equal effective. What's the role of surgery? Is the drainage of subperiosteum. Surgeon's knife within few minutes can relieve bacteria of billions of bacteria, and therefore body's load of toxic material as well as antibiotics will work better. Bone drilling already discussed to relieve increased interosseous pressure, particularly if subperiosteal pus is not found with all the clinical criteria of osteomyelitis fulfilled, should be done, particularly after 24 hours of effective antibiotic treatment. I hope I should stop here and like to have any question from anyone. Hello? Do you hear me? So I should stop here today. Chronic osteomyelitis itself is a big, so that will be covered in the second lecture.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I'm ending the meeting here.
Sir. Sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you once please repeat the difference between septic arthritis and osteomyelitis?
Very good question. Yes, septic arthritis and osteomyelitis, acute osteomyelitis. So it's say in case of proximal femur, the epiphysis is intracapsular. Capsule is attached anteriorly in the intertrochanteric region. Posteriorly, it's just a bit proximal to that reach. However, the capital femoral epiphysis is intracapsular. So, larger portion of the metaphysis is intracapsular. So, in that case, whenever there is acute osteomyelitis, there is also septic arthritis. That's why in children, in case of acute osteomyelitis, femoral head readily separates out and gets absorbed. That is called Tom Smith arthritis. So, how to differentiate between septic arthritis and osteomyelitis? In case of septic arthritis in knee, there is swelling will be in the knee, or in case of elbow, it will be around the tenderness as well as swelling maximum will be around the knee. On attempted movement, there will be severe, because of severe spasm of the muscle spasm, there will be restriction of movement. Even if there is collection in case of osteomyelitis, that's away from joint, there will be some reflex spasm to prevent movement, thereby to lessen the pain. But some pain-free movement, particularly rotation or like thing, may be there, which is missed. Almost global restriction of the movement, that's the hallmark of septic arthritis. And in case of osteomyelitis, there may be some swelling is more marked in case of septic arthritis for the joint compared to osteomyelitis. Maximum area of tenderness, that will be more in over the joint compared to metaphyseal region in case of osteomyelitis. Okay? Very nice question. Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you. Okay. Bye. See you next week. The same time.